everyone, I'm Allie with Potomac Beads, and in today's Better Beader episode, I'm going to go over rings with you. So there's jump rings, split rings, soldered rings, interior, exterior dimensions, lots of different things showing you how to open them, how to make them, how to cut them, all of the above. So we're going to go over rings. Now, when you think of rings, you may think of chainmail jewelry. And yes, there is chainmail jewelry, which again, I was reading a book last night to my son about knights, and same idea, chainmail. There's interior and exterior sizes on this jump ring that can kind of affect the different size. But to start out, I want to go over what is a jump ring, what is a split ring, what is a soldered, some different shapes, and so forth. So let's get right into it. So I have here some examples of different rings that are sitting on my mat to go over with you and kind of the different styles of what they may be used. You may only be familiar with jump rings when they're used kind of at the end of the project, or soldered rings to connect one thing to another. This is used really, really effectively on some of the jewelry, such as the new links that we got. I'll get those out too for you, where Bridget just took the jump rings, made a nice quick linked bracelet, and we used bigger links as well to link on and add some tassels to the bottom of a little pendant here. So that's usually what you're thinking of when you think of jump ring. Jump ring is going to be a ring, and you can see it really easily here. A jump ring is going to be a ring that is open or cut. So you're thinking of a full circle, and it's being cut to create that opening, which is going to be the jump ring. When you think of key ring, that's actually going to be called a split ring. A split ring, like this key ring, and my magnet is sticking to my bracelet here. The split ring, you're going to think of it, I have a big gold one here to show you too. The split ring is like a keychain, like I'm saying here. And when you're looking at it, it's going to go basically around the project, or around the piece, or around the loop size, basically 2 times. It usually has a place in the middle where it doesn't quite meet each other, but that's going to be a split ring. In addition to the split ring and the jump ring, you're also going to have closed or soldered rings. So closed or soldered rings are going to be perfect circles. They're not going to have an opening in it, and you're not going to be able to kind of cut it and open it up. You want to keep them as being soldered. These are great to link on to lobster clasps. They're great if you're linking thread right onto a project so it doesn't have any opening. They're also going to come with a little bit higher price tag, because somebody has to go in and actually solder each little piece, or they have to actually mold them and put them into a mold and kind of dump it out. So they're actually kind of pouring them into that mold, dumping it out, or somebody's soldering that as they're working with it. So when you're talking about jump rings, you'll have jump rings, and you'll have usually opened or closed jump rings, or soldered jump rings. The open ones are going to be what you're most familiar with. Closed or soldered is going to be literally closed or soldered. Whether or not these come in kind of a shape, think outside the box. These are actually hearts here. We have some hearts, we have some ovals, we have different shapes that are going to be essentially closed rings. You can even take that closed ring and use it as a necklace to hang down kind of in the front. You can also use a toggle ring, or the other side of a toggle, as a ring too. So kind of, again, think outside that box. You have also closed ones, you have squares, that sort of thing. Most of those are going to be soldered in nature. When you're talking about jump rings, those are going to be open, and you can have some oval ones. You can have, these are here, are antique, twisted, silver plated. I used them with some glass rings and had fun with them there. But jump rings are going to open and close. You can open and close them and make intricate patterns of them, like the chainmail jewelry, and for that you're going to need specific sizes. Most of the time when you're talking about rings, or jump rings in particular, you're going to have different gauges or different thicknesses. Sometimes, like for this bracelet here, it's not going to matter a ton. You're just going for the look. So you have this smaller, this is a 20 gauge, and I think it's about a 4.5 millimeter jump ring. When you're talking jump rings, generally speaking, if you want to kind of get your caliper out and measure, the jump rings are going to be measured by their outer diameter. It's going to matter for chainmail jewelry whether or not it's the outer or the inner diameter. Some things in chainmail most likely will have inner diameter, or ID, if you're looking at the artistic wire. They're also going to have the gauge that they are, 20 gauge or 18 gauge, 16, 22. When it comes to opening and closing jump rings, I really don't like to use anything lower than a 20 gauge because it is open and it can kind of be opened. And because of that, you're going to be able to force that open when you're not trying to, and that's how you lose jewelry projects. So you want to make sure that anytime you're using a jump ring, you want to be using at least a 20 gauge, in my opinion. If you go thicker and use an 18 gauge, that's even nicer sometimes, but in that case, sometimes you may not be able to fit through the links or to connect beads if you want to do that. So when you're talking chainmail or jewelry, linking that kind of jewelry together, that's when it's going to matter for that inner diameter. Most of the time, the inner diameter is going to be referenced as millimeters, but you can also see here in the artistic wire, it's referenced as inches, in addition to that gauge. Obviously, the gauge is going to affect that inner diameter because if you have a bigger ring that's 4 millimeter on the outside, and then one that's thicker that's 4 millimeter on the outside, it's actually going to have a smaller interior. That's why when you're doing chainmail, that interior matters. When you're just linking jewelry, the interior is not going to matter that much. So going into rings, then how do you open a split ring? So you can either break your nails or you can actually use a little tweezers and kind of pull. Keep in mind if you're using gold filled or sterling silver, they're a lot softer than like a base metal or a nickel plated here. But the nickel ones and the base metal actually stay together really, really well. Sometimes the actual sterling silver or the gold filled are going to be soft. The reason to use a split ring versus a jump ring is because you have something thin going through, you have beading wire, you have thread, and you don't want it to fit through and kind of come out of that little opening of the jump ring. Because it is very, very hard to close a jump ring properly. So that gets me into the next section of kind of how to close a jump ring. So keep in mind when jump rings are made, and I have here a little knitting needle just to show you if you want to manufacture, make your own jump rings. Here's some 20 gauge wire. You can literally take the wire, coil it. Some people will even hook it up to their drill, and you can coil this wire around the knitting needle to create your jump rings. Obviously, whatever the size of the ring is going to be, that's going to be the jump rings. You need to make sure when you're doing this, you have a super flush pliers if you want it to be exact, and you're literally going to cut along the project and kind of saw along. These pliers or these cutters aren't going to be the ideal one to make your jump rings, but that's how you can make the jump rings. They're designed when you're working with jump rings so that the end ends perfectly where the other side starts. To open your jump ring, you want to use 2 pliers, especially if you're using an 18 gauge, or in this case here with my 20 gauge wire, I can open it really, really easily, especially because I'm using a softer artistic wire. Simply hold on to one side, and with the pliers on the other side, you want to open in the opposite direction. You don't want to pull back on the pliers because what that's going to do is actually go in and change the shape from that nice circle that you just made. When you're closing it up, you're going to pull back and go past where you think it might be closed a little bit, and then it'll kind of spring back into that loop. These are simple ones that I made just with that knitting needle that you can make with, again, 18, 20, even 16 gauge if you want to do that. If you're going to do something like chainmail, buy them or get a saw or get a actual drill that you can drill them kind of with because you're going to need a mass amount of them. I've never been interested that much in chainmail. I just get frustrated with the 2 rings, and especially most of the time you want 2 pliers rather than just your hands and your pliers when you're working with them. Again, with that split ring pliers, you want a tweezers or a split ring opener to open that. There's also a little ring that you can wear if you're doing a lot of chainmail. It's literally just a Phillips head screwdriver kind of end on a screw, and you just kind of open and close it when you're working with it too. It's important to know that you have the proper size or the proper gauge for your project. If you have a nice light project, that's where making something out of 20 gauge might not be terrible. But again, I would always err on the side of 18 gauge. I like a thicker gauge. It makes me feel more secure if I'm using the split ring or using the jump ring rather than the split ring. Again, the reason to use the split ring is because you have something thinner that you don't want the thread to go through. So here in this case, I have a gold filled, actually this is a tiny, tiny gold filled split ring that I have here. And I use that because I have the thread and I don't want the thread to actually get accidentally get outside of that jump ring. A better option to do is actually to use a wire guard. The wire guards are going to be a great, or wire protectors, wire guardians, wire protectors. They're going to be a great way to kind of connect to those jump rings if you do have jump rings that are not soldered or not closed and you want to connect some of your bead weaving to it. Use that wire guardian to connect to it, so that way the wire guardian is actually a little bit thicker, and that's what's going to be rubbing against the metal when you're working with it. Again, with the idea of the jump rings versus the split rings, keep in mind that when they are packaged specifically for that chainmail, you're going to get that inner diameter. If you're not sure if you're ordering or if you're checking out or if you're shopping somewhere else, check out and make sure if you need a specific size that you know whether or not that's the inner or the outer diameter if you're doing that chainmail. If you're not doing chainmail, again, usually it's just an aesthetic looking. Are you looking for something that's a little bit thicker, bigger, stronger, more fine, because you want it to look a little bit more delicate? So that's where you kind of get to play more of that artistic role rather than going in and actually having to be an exact size. Again, if you are looking to have something that is connecting to something that's already open or connecting to thread or linking onto a lobster clasp and you don't want it to open, keep in mind there is the option of the soldered or the closed rings as well. Again, you can make your own rings. You can check out some videos on that online. You can check out how to cut them, how to manufacture them, again, with that drill and kind of hook them up to a drill so they're just spiraling around. But most likely, you are just going to buy a pack or two of some jump rings and split rings. I would recommend that you get, again, that 20 and above gauge. Anything smaller than that gets really, really thin. If you need something smaller than that to go through the end of a chain or do a repair, check out my video on repairing the end of a chain necklace, because it's better to start with a really thin gauge of wire and do some wire coiling and twisting with that so you don't have something that can actually open. If you are looking to do something just having them hang down here from the ends of the earrings, having them from the ends of the earrings that was on my mat, or linking beads together, have fun, check out 20 gauge and above and look at those different sizes. Most of the time they're going to be referencing the outer diameter unless they're specifically packaged to measure the inner diameter for that chainmail style jewelry, which is really cool. There's so many options out there and really can take on a whole different look. If you're just getting started in jewelry making, I would recommend getting about a 6mm jump ring just to have on hand, because you'll use it more than you think. You may want to get a little bit thicker and go 8mm as well if you want to hang tassels or anything like that. It's good to have a couple on hand in a couple different colors as well. As with all the Better Beader episodes, they are designed to make you a better beader. That is our goal here at Potomac Beads, that we not only have people that love to make the craft, but that we empower people to make their own decisions, to find out more information, to design their own jewelry, and to really become a creator themselves. As always, you can also subscribe to this YouTube channel. Right below me, there's a little like button, a subscribe, a bell. You can hit all those for us, comment and list below as well to help us out in that aspect. Remember, again, if you want to, you can get regular updates from us by subscribing to this YouTube channel. If you need any materials, any jump rings, any split rings, any sort of closed rings, check below the video in the details box, which has a little drop down near that little bell that says show more. And you'll get links to all the different projects from us or products from us online at potomacbeads.com as well as potomacbeads.io. Also, check out our jewelry group in Facebook for beading and jewelry making. Ask to become a member there. Show what you do with jump rings. Give your ideas, your suggestions, and really get an array of inspiration and design ideas too. As always, thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you learned a thing or two about working with jump rings, how to close them up, how to open them up, and what the different gauges, sizes, and styles are.